Welcome to another episode. Today, we're adding more power to the Yukon. For those of you who may not have seen my previous videos, this is my family's camping rig. We pull a 26-foot camper with this. It's got helper bags in the back. We've done some cooling mods to it. It has a bigger Mishimoto radiator and the HD 7 and 9 blade fan setup in it to help it when it's under those heavy loads pulling the hills where we live. One thing that I really want this vehicle to be able to do is have a little bit more mid-range torque. Sometimes when I'm pulling a big load, it seems to, up and down shift a little bit more than I want it to, and I just want it to have a little bit more torque, kind of in that cruising range. So I reached out to BTR, or Brian Tooley Racing, talked through some of their cam options, and we settled on the V2 or Stage 2 V2 truck cam, Gen 3 and 4. Part numbers right there. Stage 2 truck, and I went ahead and did the hardened push rods and the springs that go with it, the 18 SK0118 spring kit to go with it. That was our recommended combination. Now what you may not know is that these Gen 4 vehicles, so late 07, 08 through 14, are considered Gen 4, and those Gen 4 vehicles have VVT. This particular cam does not utilize the VVT, so we have to do a VVT delete. So we're going back to the old style cam gear, the old style cover, and the old style chain guide. It's a 3-bolt cam, so 3-bolt, 3-bolt versus the VVT, which is one big oil control valve bolt in the middle. So in order to make this work on this vehicle, we have to convert it backwards in time a little bit. You're also going to need a crank bolt, and if you haven't done the upgraded left-hand valve cover to help with oil consumption, we're going to be doing that too. That's the part number. There's a GM part number as well. And so we're going to need one set of valve cover gasket for the other side, since we're going to have it apart. And I'm going to be doing a new water pump while we're in there. And we will need a 3-jaw puller to get that crank off, the crank pulley off. And then we're not pulling the heads or the intake manifold on this. And the reason being is because this is not a VVT, or sorry, this is not an AFM DOD engine. So late 07 to I think 8, 9, and I want to say somewhere around 10. I'll put it on the screen here. I'll do some research, but I think the early 3 years don't have the AFM and DOD in these 6.2 liters. And so it saves us a bunch of time because we don't have to pull the heads and do lifters and all that and DOD delete things. So we can just get away with doing springs and seals in place without pulling the heads. Now, if you have lifter tick or something like that, obviously just go ahead and pull the heads and put lifters in it. This motor's been strong. I have no issues with the lifters, so we're not going to do that. And because of that, I have these rods. They are, see if you can read it, Powerhouse lifter retaining tool. So that helps, so you can slide them in on either side of the cam, and it will hold the lifters up while you do the cam swap if you're not pulling the heads. If you're pulling the heads and the lifters, then it doesn't matter. And then we have our crank installation tool. You don't have to use this, but it's a good idea to use this. It prevents marring up the threads, or risk of marring up the threads in the crank. But that is basically what we're doing today. So we're going to get started. Step 1, we're just going to get this intake snorkel off and this cover here off, so it just gives us a little bit more room to work. Once we get those two things off, The next thing we're going to do is get the coolant out and get the radiator and fan setup out of the way so that we have enough room to get our cam and tools in the front here and give us just more room to work. These come out real simple. So yeah, we're gonna get this snorkel off, we're gonna get this cover off. This cover just lifts off, so you kind of just give it a pop like that, and then you just have to work it out. It's gonna fight you kind of around these heater core hoses here, so you're gonna need two hands, but just kind of work it and she'll come out like that. And then your intake snorkel here, we're just gonna get that hose clamp right there, and we'll pop out this breather line right there. It just pulls straight out, and then we'll grab the hose clamp over here, or you can take the whole box, up to you, and we'll lift that up and out of the way. I think there's a hose. Yeah, you gotta pop that thing out as well where the hose holds in, but that'll get us going here. So now that that's all out of the way and off, next we're gonna work on getting our radiator and fans out of the way. We're gonna get to the water pump. That's the next thing that's got to come off. So down over here on this fan shroud, there's two 10 millimeters. There's one here. There's one below it. This little tag is blocking it, but it's right here. And those two 10 millimeters have to come off. And then you can unplug the fans right here, and the fans will just lift out. There's actually a handle right here for them. After you get these two 13 millimeters up top that hold it. So two 13 millimeters up top, two 10s over here that hold these transcooler lines on, then the plug-ins, and then it will come out. So with the fans out, now you can drain your coolant. I have a nice Mishimoto with a petcock there that you can pop to drain the coolant. So it's going to be messy no matter how you do it. So you can either do the petcock and try to catch as much as you can, or you can just pop the lower radiator hose off and just let it spray. But either way, coolant needs to come out. And once it's done draining, then we'll get our radiator hoses off of the water pump here. So we'll go here and here where the thermostat is. And then we will have to disconnect these cooler lines. You might have a cooler on both sides. So you might have an oil cooler over here and a trans cooler over here. I just have a trans cooler on mine. So the way that these come off is these little plastic guards just pull out, and then there is a little spring clip, like a horseshoe clip, that holds this on, and you have to get a pick tool and put your hand behind it so that it doesn't fly away. But just pop those out, and then these will just pull straight out. Once you have all of your hoses disconnected, they go to the radiator. So there's one here, there's one here. You could also do them straight at the radiator, whichever is easier for you. We've got our transcooler lines off, and then there's one small line right there. And then this line here, which I almost missed, but you gotta get this line off too, or you can disconnect it over there. And then there's two 13 millimeters on each side, one here and one here. And then this radiator will just tilt forward and come out. So now that the radiator is out of the way, the next step is we're going to get these belts off, both of these belts. Both of them have a tensioner, so this is a tensioner here, and there is a tensioner here for the AC belt. And we're going to get both of those belts off so that we can get the water pump off and get the crank pulley pulled and get the front end kind of exposed. So for this tensioner, you're just going to go clockwise like that, and that will release the belt. I can't do it with one hand, but you get the idea. And then for this one down here, you're going to use a ratchet or an extension, throw it in that square, and do the same thing. So next thing we need to do is, there's a couple more hose clamps over here that we need to get off the water pump, so just squeeze and remove. Those should pull away. Be careful, this is a plastic union here, so just be careful not to torque that like super crazy or anything. We'll get that out of the way, and then we're gonna pull this tensioner off. You can do this on or off the car, it doesn't matter, but looks like two probably 15s here, so right here and here. We're gonna get these off, get the tensioner off, and then we're gonna get the water pump off. It's just a few 10 millimeters on each side, and we shouldn't have to pull this bracket that holds the alternator and the power steering pump. That should be able to stay in place from what I can see. But then yeah, we'll get the water pump out of there. So with the tensioner off and the hoses off, now we've got 3 10 millimeters on each side to hold the water pump on. So we'll get those 3 out, and then this water pump should just come loose. So water pump's off, 3 bolts on each side, and now for the crank bolt, it's a 24 millimeter, and if you have, we call this thing Bertha, but the Milwaukee electric impact, it will take it off. I just zipped this one off with it. If not, you might have to get creative and use the starter with a breaker bar, or have somebody hold the crankshaft or something like that. But for this one, the big electric impact took it off. When we put it back together, we're gonna have to hold the flex plate and torque it properly, but for disassembly, we were able to just gun it out of there. So now that we've got it loose, we're gonna use our puller. So we just thread that back in a little bit, and then we can use that to push our puller against. So we'll put our claw puller on here and walk this out. And then once this is off, then our full timing cover will be exposed. But then we're going to pause, and we're going to move on to valve covers and valve springs and seals. So you're going to need a 3-inch 3-jaw puller. And some of these pullers have rods, dowels that go down inside the crank. Some of them don't. This one doesn't. But on the back, there are 3 flats that you can see that it's grabbing onto. And then I'll see if I can get an action shot here. So the crank will, the harmonic balancer here will walk itself off as you go about this. So that's how you get it out. You might need, depending on how stuck yours is, usually once you get to the end of this where the threads are, you know, you thread in that bolt just a couple, 2 or 3 threads. By the time you get to the end, usually you can just get this off. If it still fights you and you need a longer bolt, you might need to use the pulley installer bolt, or just go to the hardware store and find a longer grade 8 bolt that's the same pitch, to be able to use your puller on, if your puller doesn't have the rods like this one. So this one did fight me a little bit, so I had to use the install tool bolt that's a little bit longer, just to get that last little bit, to get that off. So I had to thread this in and then use the tip of this for the puller. So we're gonna pause there. We could take this all apart, but I'd rather not expose you know, dirt and debris falling in there. So we're gonna pause until we're actually ready, and we're gonna get over and get these valve covers off and start doing springs. So one thing that you will need if you're gonna do it like I'm doing it in place is you will need a leak down tester. And a leak down tester basically fills the cylinders with compressed air, and we're gonna do that to hold the valves up while we compress the springs and replace the seals and put the new springs on. And so what that means is all the spark plugs need to come out, and the valve covers need to come off. And the way that pretty much every LS motor or LS based motor ever is designed is there is basically one master plug here that controls all of your ignition coils. So we're just going to unplug that, and then there are a few 10 millimeters that hold this bracket on, you know, kind of throughout. So you just have to look for them. I think there's 3 or 4 that like here, 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 and I think over here. So maybe there's more than 4, but anyways, you'll see them. And then this whole bracket will come off, so you'll get your spark plug wires off, the coil pack bracket off, and then your valve cover will be exposed. And then we can take the valve cover off and go from there. But just if you haven't recently done your spark plug wires, plan on replacing them, because if they're old at all, they will just completely tear apart when you try to take them off. But yeah, so I'm gonna get these brackets off both sides and get the spark plug wires out and the spark plugs out, and then and we'll pick up from there. So once you get the ignition coil bracket off, then there's 8mm bolts that hold the valve cover on. You're gonna be there's a PCV hose that just pulls off of that back corner over there. But yeah, basically you get these 4 off, and then this valve cover is ready to pull. So it's the same on both sides, so we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. There's a few more things in the way on the passenger side because of coolant hoses and stuff, but same deal. We're just gonna leave these harnesses and stuff in place, and we'll just pop this valve cover. It's probably stuck pretty good on there, so I might need to get a screwdriver and kind of break that seal. But before you do that, you want to make sure that like any stuff like this is kind of blown out. So I'm probably going to get the air and kind of just blow this out of the way before I break this seal and risk contaminating anything. So one thing I want to show is on this left hand side, this is the updated valve cover. So this rig already has one on it, luckily, so it means I don't need the other one. This kind of rectangular port here with the wings is the updated design. The previous design just had a circle cut kind of right here. So this is the updated one. It actually has the part number here. So this is the updated one, which means I don't need the Dorman updated one that we were planning on putting on. So that'll save us a little bit of money and a little bit of time. But if yours does not look like this when you take it off, then go ahead and update it. So that's what it looks like with the valve cover off. So from there, what we'll do is we'll just zip all those 8mm off that hold the rocker arms down, and we'll be able to get the push rods out of there, and we can start doing the springs. So once you get those all zipped out, you can take them and their guide tray out, and then you can pull the push rods. One thing I want to note, the intake and exhausts are slightly differently angled. So if you take a look, oops, excuse me, the two side by side, they point slightly different. They're shaped slightly different. Excuse me there, I almost dropped my phone. So just what I like to do is just keep them in order. So I'm just gonna take them out how they sit in there, and then I'll put them back how they sit in there. So you can see that they kind of, like this one angles one way, and the one next to it is straight. Okay, so next up, we've got our spark plugs out, we've got our rocker arms out, and push rods are out, and we're gonna do we're gonna start doing the valve spring compressing. And I have this Lingenfelter spring compressor. I've gone through multiple spring compressors, and this is by far my favorite one. Basically, you put your rocker tray back in, and this just bolts in, and obviously you can see it's been used a lot. You just put your ratchet in there, and you can compress the spring using this. So this works really well compared to the ones that you have to thread the bolts and then use the threads to go in and out. Those tend to just send metal shavings everywhere. So what we're going to do is just grab one of the bolts from our rocker arms, and we'll put our tray back in. So this is what a leak down tester looks like. So basically we're going to thread this in. We'll put some compressed air through here. This is a regulator, so you can regulate how much air to put in. So we'll put some compressed air in there so the valves don't fall while we do this. You are going to want to put the crank bolt back into the crank, and I like to brace a bar or something on one of these pulleys, because as you put compressed air into that hole, it's going to try to push the cylinder down. So having something just to kind of hold some pressure so that the piston doesn't walk on you while you're doing this is a good idea. But we're going to get our compressed air in there, we're going to tighten that bolt down, and we're going to start compressing these. Langen filter tool here. So you're just going to borrow a bolt from one of your rocker arms. You're going to thread that in. You're going to make sure you're running your tray here. So we'll thread that in all the way. We don't want to compromise any threads. Okay, so now we have our leak down tester active, so it's threaded into the spark plug hole, and I've got roughly 30 or 40 psi going in there. If you're not getting the psi you want, try rolling the crank a little bit to make a smaller volume of air. But then we're going to take our ratchet, attach our ratchet to the tool. Now the tool has a little bit of side-to-side play for offset rockers, so you're going to want to make sure that you're pretty centered. And then you're going to want to make sure you have a magnet, a small magnet tool like one of these screwdrivers that has a magnet on the end, or you can use a small magnet grabber. Then you're just going to pry down, and you're going to snatch those keepers right out. And it's good to have a little magnet tray next to you to set them down in. And then you're going to flip your ratchet. This part can be kind of a pain in the butt because you got to be able to release some pressure. And then I just pop the ratchet out for this part. And then you can grab your old spring. Now you're going to want to keep the top for this kit. I could have bought new tops for these, new retainers, but I opted not to. It wasn't really necessary for what I'm doing. So I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to reach down here with some pliers. You might be able to grab these with your hands depending on how bad they are. I'm going to grab the valve seal. So this is a top hat style seal. I'm going to take a rag and just kind of clean up any of that crusties that are on there that might mess with our new seal. And then for this kit, there's a bottom shim, and a non-top hat style seal. And you're going to want to get a little bit of lube. Some lithium grease or some oil will work. Just lube up that stem a little bit. You're going to want to make sure this goes on flat. I like to use my thumb to get it over that eclipse. And then get it down in there and just firmly press. And it'll kind of seat itself. BTR does sell a little tool, but you have to remove this tool, thread that one in. It takes quite a bit longer, and these don't take a ton of force to seat, so you just use your fingers around it, seat it down. And then we're going to take our new spring, set it in there. We're going to take our old keeper top. We're going to get a keeper ready. Make sure you're centered on your top hat here, otherwise it'll fly away. And I got my keeper in my hand. I'm just going to compress very carefully without dropping my keeper. I'm going to kind of thread it in there. While holding tension, I'm going to grab the other half of the keeper. Drop it in the top. I'm going to compress until they both drop and very slowly let go and make sure that they seat. And then we move on to the next one. And you just repeat that process for every single one of them. Now the ones close to the firewall are going to be a pain in the butt, and there's really nothing you can do about it. You could try a stubbier screwdriver, stubbier ratchet, but then you're going to have less leverage. So a flexi head ratchet like this is very helpful when getting those ones against the firewall. So just be real careful not to drop those keepers. If you do, if they drop immediately below the spring, they're not going to really go anywhere, so just have your magnet handy. But just be real careful not to drop any keepers, and it's pretty smooth sailing from there. The only other note I have is every spark plug hole is for 2 of these valves. So I'm going to be able to do this one and the one next to it, and then I'm going to have to move my leak down tester to the next hole to do the next 2, and so on and so forth. If the keepers are a little bit stuck, let's say you try doing this and it wants to push the valve down even though you've got air in there, take this tool off, and with a soft hammer just give all these a tiny tap just to kind of break them loose first. So we got this timing cover off here. It's just held on by these bolts around, and then there's 2 that come up from the bottom here. So you gotta get these 2 off, and then the surrounding bolts, and this cover will come off. This harness we just unbolted and laid out of the way here. This is different than the VVT Delete cover and harness, and so we're going to use this harness because it's a 5-pin, I believe, because it has that extra sensor versus just a 3-pin. So we'll put the new cover on. We'll use the you can use the older, the new sensor. They're the same sensor, but we're going to run this harness up the new cover. But yeah, so once you get this cover off, this is what it looks like. And then, quick update, this is what all your new springs look like as well. Alright, so it's a 24 millimeter on the center of this cam gear, so we're going to zip that out. That's a one-time use bolt. If you are reusing it, we're going to be converting ours, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. The thrust plate is T40. So we're going to take those out and we can get to the cam from there. You be really careful not to strip these out, so be real soft, or break them by hand first. Okay, now before we pull the cam out, we need to use our dowels to hold up our lifters. So you want to spin the cam and it'll kind of kick those lifters up, and then those dowels will just hold them in place.
I think we're good to go.
Now the cam's good to come out.
I got a special tool to pull that thing out too. Oh my gosh, dude. I don't think it'll clear with the bolt.
I might need that. Alright, we're skipping ahead a little bit here, but new cam is in. Follow the instructions on the ARP box for the bolts there. We went ahead and put the LS3 style guide in here as well. You're going to want to kind of get it in time before you put that in. The previous guide that was in here was broken, and it's pretty common for them to break. And I don't recommend doing it this way, but we were able to get the old one out and the new one in without dropping the oil pan. The safer way to do it would be to drop the oil pan and get the pickup tube off the oil pump. We were able to get enough clearance by taking those bolts out to wiggle the old one out and sneak the new one in, but it was definitely time consuming and tedious, and you know, I would just drop the oil pan if I was going to do it again. But we got our new guide in there. You can also run the factory guide, so if your guide is still okay, you can just use it. You don't have to go through all that. But since my guide was broken, we went ahead and just updated it to the LS3 style guide that goes with this type of gear. But we got it all back together. Now we're going to put the cover back on. You're going to want to put a little bit of silicone in those corners, right there and there. And then the new style cover will go on. Once it's on, we'll pop this off. You can pop these off before or after. It really doesn't matter, because we're going to be using our previous harness to go with it. So change of plans. Instead of just using the other bracket, won't fit on this timing cover. It doesn't quite fit unless you lop off the piece that kind of comes out over here. You can just cut it off and it would fit, but it was hitting right here. But upon further inspection, the wiring harness that went to my previous cam sensor and stuff was all showing bare wires and stuff. So I just paused, and then we ended up just depinning and repinning the connector down here with this harness so that you know, the wires all match, and using the new harness that came on the cover. If your wires aren't bare, then just reuse your harness. It's easier, and just cut that bracket. Now we're putting this crank pulley in, so I'm going to lube the outside of this just so that because it's going to ride this seal right here. Put a little bit of assembly lube in there, and then we've got our install tool installed, and give it a couple threads into the crank, and then we're going to walk that crank pulley back on. And then once it's walked on with the installer tool, then we'll use the new factory bolt It's a one-time use bolt, and we'll torque it down. Alright, so we've got our water pump back on, our valve covers back on. Sorry I missed the part where we're putting the rocker arms back on, but you're just going to put those back on, and with the new, or if you're reusing your push rods, that's fine. And then you're going to torque those to 22 foot-pounds. And then, yep, valve covers are back on. Went ahead and cleaned them up. New water pump. And from here, it's just reversive install. So get your coil pack brackets back on and put your spark plugs back in and radiator back in and give her a fire. Here we go.